Also have the next page, Ezra chapter 1 there. Now this week what we are doing is we are looking at the time between, so the in-between times. The time in between 2 Kings, 2 Chronicles. So remember, those are the same exact story, same exact storyline, but from a different viewpoint, from a different vantage point, and the book of Ezra. Now 2 Kings are the final writings from before the exile of Judah to Babylon. So this would be pre-exilic. So 2 Kings, 2 Chronicles, the information, what is going on there is pre-exilic. And then after the exile, all of the writings are called post-exilic. 1st and 2nd Chronicles, in majority, the author reminds the children of Israel while in Babylon that they will return to the promised land. And the author uses the lessons of the kings of Judah to convey important lessons on how not to end up in exile again. A big part of that is the importance, remember, in 2nd Chronicles, the importance around the house of the Lord, the temple. There are at least 6 books which are set in the post-exile Israel period. 3 are historical. These are Ezra, Nehemiah, and Esther. Then 3 of them are prophetic. These would be Haggai and Zechariah, which find their time in the book of Ezra, and then Malachi, which finds its point in Nehemiah. There are 4 books set during the exile, which are all prophetic and have some historical pieces in them and involved. These are Jeremiah, Lamentations, Ezekiel, and Daniel. Now, in Genesis, if we remember, we see there Abraham in Genesis chapter 12. Then through Genesis chapter 50 are the story of the descendants and how God is interacting with Abraham and his direct descendants before they go into Egypt. And as they are entering into Egypt, a 400-year break then happens between Genesis chapter 50 and Exodus chapter 1. Through 2 Chronicles is an unbroken storyline of the children of Israel. So Exodus all the way through the end of 2 Chronicles, 2 Chronicles chapter 36. It's one continual storyline that is unbroken. After 2 Chronicles, we have a fractured storyline, however, with little glimpses into certain individuals during the exile. We then have the final pieces of Israel's history prior to Jesus within our Bibles with the post-exile or post-exilic historical books, then the 3 final post-exile or post-exilic prophets who speak into that group of people who had come out of exile. They're in Ezra, Nehemiah, and Esther. In Babylon, they have come out of that from Babylon, and now they're under the Persian Empire. 2 Kings, if we remember, follows until the end of the last king of Judah, who had sat on the throne in Jerusalem until he died in Babylon. And 2 Kings, the end there, summarized the last of his years. In 2 Chronicles chapter 36, verses 19 through 21, we see the Babylonians, they have come. They burned the house of God. They broke down the wall of Jerusalem. They burned all of its palaces with fire, and they destroyed all of its precious possessions. In 2 Chronicles chapter 36, verses 20 through 21, tell us, and those who escaped from the sword, that King Nebuchadnezzar, he carried away to Babylon, where they became servants to him and his sons until the rule of the kingdom of Persia, to fulfill the word of the Lord by the mouth of Jeremiah. When the days of the exile had been completed, we see 2 Chronicles chapter 36, verse 22. Now in the first year of Cyrus, king of Persia, that the word of the Lord by the mouth of Jeremiah might be fulfilled. Okay, so Jeremiah's prophetic ministry began as the downfall and just prior to and just as Babylon came and sacked, if we remember, sacked Jerusalem, carried them away, and Jeremiah's ministry continued into the very beginning of that captivity of Judah into Babylon. And Jeremiah prophesied from Jerusalem and was there. Now in Ezra chapter 1, verse 1, if we remember, it continues on, and it says, now in the first year of Cyrus, king of Persia, that the word of the Lord might be fulfilled that was spoken by Jeremiah. So the same exact words fit at the end of 2 Chronicles and the beginning of the book of Ezra, if we remember. So one to the other. Between this space of 2 Chronicles chapter 36, verse 21, and 2 Chronicles chapter 36, verse 22, there's a break of space. There's a bit of white space if you're reading. In this space, there's 50 years that go by. During these 50 years, Jeremiah through Daniel happen. During this space, there are also major geopolitical events which happen that are very similar to the major geopolitical events even that we're experiencing today in our world. If we can better understand these major geopolitical events that happen in between this space of time, these 50 years, it can help us to better understand the events which follow in Ezra, Nehemiah, and Esther. The 6 main events are the fall of Assyria to Babylon, the destruction of Jerusalem and the temple, the 70-year exile, the writings of the prophets during the exile, the fall of Babylon to Persia, and the decree of Cyrus, which allowed the people to go back into the land and rebuild the temple. Then we also saw there in Ezra and in Nehemiah, the people were rebuilt, and they also were able to rebuild the wall and the city of Jerusalem. In 2 Chronicles chapter 36, verse 21, this is about 600 BC, the year 600 BC. From 900 to 600 BC, the Assyrian Empire was expanding and forming very rapidly into what we see at its end in 609 BC. Before that point, the Assyrian Empire, it wasn't really an empire. It was just a bunch of band of raiders that would constantly nag at and pick at the Syrian Empire and all the empires around them. The Syrians said that they were just this little pest and this fly that wouldn't quit bugging them, that were just a bunch of band of raiders. But then in 900 BC, they come to and they begin to rise into their powerhouse setting. And then the end of their empire was in 609 BC. During this time, Assyria was making advancements more quickly than their neighbors. 150 years before 2 Chronicles chapter 36, verse 21, the Assyrian Empire was developing very rapidly. And these were included, but it wasn't only these things, but their big advancements during this 150 years were that they were the first to have a standing military. Their occupation was war, year-round military campaigns. They were not farmers or blacksmiths who only a couple of months of the year would go off to war. They pioneered iron weaponry. They developed an engineering corps. They had engineered siege towers, battering rams, and mobile ladders. They transitioned away from chariots to mounted cavalry. They were the first to develop an army to be able to sustain long-distance campaigns that would take them up to 300 miles away from a base of operations. Also, 150 years before 2 Chronicles chapter 36, verse 21, they were developing and engineering breakthroughs in their modern technology and their modern system of just their daily life. These included, they developed massive irrigation systems, their extensive road networks, which had relay stations unmatched in the Middle East until the 19th century AD. That is insane. That is crazy. For more than 3,000 years, unmatched in the region of the Middle East. They also developed the ability to tunnel under city walls, very heavy city walls, and even cut off water at its source. They also developed administrative reforms during this time, reforms which centralized power by dividing the empire into provinces governed by royal appointees. They developed mass deportation in order to dilute local identity and spreading Assyrian technology without the threat of local revolt. They also developed interior design, but their interior design wasn't what we have today with Van Goghs and all these other famous artwork and this nice, just great to look at. Their interior design, their ancient wallpaper was instead, it was psychological warfare. It showed what they would do to anyone who would revolt and come against them. This backdrop was a lot of the reason for the drama in the book of Jonah that happened. In 722 BC, under the leadership of Shalmaneser V, the Assyrians marched south and decimated Samaria, the capital city of the northern 10 tribes there of Israel, and they took everyone into captivity in exile. Later in 705 BC, under the leadership of Sennacherib, they came to attack and besiege Judah and Jerusalem. Sennacherib attacked and conquered most of the Judean outlying cities, and all of the people retreated to Jerusalem and prepared for the Assyrians. 2 Chronicles chapter 32 tells us that Hezekiah prepared for this Assyrian siege by reinforcing the walls, constructing more weapons, and rerouting the spring to under the city of Jerusalem because of that technology which the Assyrians had developed. In 2 Chronicles chapter 32 verse 7 tells us that although King Hezekiah prepared these things, he didn't trust in these things to save them. The reason why there is much more with us is because the arm of the flesh is with them, but the arm of the Lord is with us, Hezekiah said. That's the reason why he didn't trust in these pre-initiatives to the Assyrian offensive there on the city of Jerusalem in siege. Sennacherib was then unable to take Jerusalem, and Sennacherib went home and chronicled these events on a relief known as Sennacherib's Prism. And the reason why he was not able to take Jerusalem was not because of what Hezekiah had prepared in the physical things, but because Hezekiah prepared and set his face to the Lord to seek the Lord. 100 years later, in 612 BC, the Babylonian Empire, under the leadership of Nabopolassar, sacked the capital of Nineveh of the Assyrians. The Assyrians then flee to Haran, and in 609 BC, the Babylonians defeat the last Assyrian king. In 605 BC, the Assyrians left. Then they joined with the Egyptians for the Battle of Carchemish in northern Syria and southern Turkey today along the west side of the Euphrates River to try to defeat the Babylonians one last time. Josiah, as the Egyptians are traveling north, King Josiah, the last great king of Judah, as the Egyptians are traveling north, he sees them moving through the land in order to fight Babylon. King Josiah goes out to fight with the Egyptians. Pharaoh Necho then says, I don't want to fight with you, Josiah. Josiah is deadly injured in the battle that Josiah goes to fight with Pharaoh Necho, and then Josiah goes back and dies in Jerusalem. After the Battle of Carchemish, King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon wants to control the major trade routes, so he travels south towards Africa. Along this trade route is the city of Jerusalem. The city of Jerusalem sits right off of this major trade route. There's no battle, and Nebuchadnezzar takes the city of Jerusalem. In 605 BC, Jerusalem is placed under tribute and won't reign itself, won't make its political, its leadership decisions after this point in 605 until we see the Jewish people coming back in the land in 1948, and the nation state of Israel is reformed then. Babylon empties out the treasuries at this time in 605 BC and the temple and takes everything back to Babylon. In 597 BC, Babylon comes back. 2 Kings chapter 24 tells us, and takes a majority of the people into exile to the river Chebar, near where the Tigris and the Euphrates rivers split. This here at the river Chebar, this refugee camp, is when Ezekiel goes into captivity. And then we see later, then the word of the Lord comes to Ezekiel, and Ezekiel begins his prophetic ministry. In 587 BC, Judah's final king rebels against Babylon. 2 Chronicles chapter 36 says that he asked Egypt to help. The reason for all of this, why Judah was defeated. The author of 2 Chronicles tells us that they despised the word of God and sought to live independent from the word of God and to rely on the ways, the wisdom, the means of man, the defense of man, the strength of man. Jeremiah uses the words, the people follow the dictates of their own hearts. The people are putting great value upon whatever their hearts say. We say, follow your own hearts today, or follow your emotions. But our emotions are the most unstable parts of our lives. I think all of our lives can tell us that today. They're very unstable. The Bible tells us when we follow our emotions, things become unstable. They begin just as we begin when we put our faith and trust in our emotions. They begin to dismiss God's word, and they begin to live independent of the word of God. And this is why their society collapsed. After this period, it brings in another period of Israel's history known as the exile or captivity. This period lasts for 70 years, but doesn't last 70 years for everyone. Daniel goes into captivity in 705 BC with that first wave. Ezekiel and a majority of them go in 597 BC. Everyone else goes in 587 BC. The captivity then ends in 536 BC. From the time of Jerusalem and the temple being destroyed It's closer to 50 years, from 587 to 536 BC. There are four major events for Israel during this time. We see number one, the first one is the diaspora. We know from history that Egypt would enslave. The Assyrians and Babylonians would displace. The Romans would later bring troops into Jerusalem and control the people. Psalm chapter 137 and Jeremiah chapter 29 are two very important postcards that are delivered to this diaspora, that are sitting there, that are dispersed by the exile, of how to live while in exile. They're in exile because of the choices they made. God restoring things doesn't mean he's going to restore things to how they were, but God is promising that he's going to restore things. And we're encouraged in these two postcards in Psalm 137 and Jeremiah 29 to seek the Lord and do what God has called us to do. The second major event for Israel during this time is the writing of the prophets. Jeremiah completes his writing during this period, where the closing half of Jeremiah is in the backdrop of this period. And he also writes the book of Lamentations. Lamentations is written from Jerusalem. Ezekiel is another of these prophets that wrote. And Ezekiel is written from the river Chebar, written from the refugee camp there and to them at the refugee camp. Daniel was written from the palace of Babylon, where Daniel is helping to govern the Babylonian Empire. Daniel writes to tell us of things that are happening at the highest geopolitical arena. Babylon then falls in 539 BC. With this happening, Cyrus of Persia has joined forces with the Medes, and they attack Babylon. Interesting. It was a joint Babylon-Mede force which defeated Assyria in 612 and 609 BC. The Medes, they had began to siege Nineveh in 614 BC, and Babylon then joined the Medes in 612 BC. Babylon alone delivered the final blow to Assyria and Egypt at Carchemish. In 550 BC, Cyrus defeated the Median king at the time and would later assimilate the Lydian and Babylonian Empire into one Achaemenid Empire along with the Persians and the Medes. Babylon is defeated by this Persian Mede force led by Cyrus in 539 BC. 200 years before this, Isaiah chapter 45, verse 2. Isaiah will predict this exact event. Jeremiah chapter 29 says that it will happen after 70 years. Babylon will be defeated after they begin coming against and have begun exiling those out of Judah. In Isaiah chapter 45, verse 2, says that this guy Cyrus will loosen the armor of kings, open double doors, and go through unshut gates. Daniel chapter 5 is a first-hand eyewitness account of the overthrow of Babylon. Daniel was there at Babylon the night when Cyrus took Babylon. That night, Belshazzar, the king of Babylon, was throwing a party, profaned the artifacts of God's temple that were taken from Jerusalem, and a writing happens on the wall by a mysterious hand. At that very night, Babylon fell to the Medes and the Persians, and this was in October 539 BC. Historians tell us that the Persian army came to the 100-foot walls of Babylon with an endless supply of water. The Babylonians had this, and it seemed unconquerable. It seemed like it was an unconquerable city. To respond to the Persians coming, the Babylonians, they threw a party to joke at them, to laugh at them, and just to enjoy their endless supply that they said, in our wisdom and our knowledge, we're not going to fall. The Greek historian Herodotus tells us while the Babylonians were partying, the Persians redirected the river enough to go under the gates of the exterior walls. But there was still at the interior walls they needed to get around and to get through. But when they came to the interior wall, there was a single door that was left open. So the Persians went through an unlocked door, just as Isaiah had predicted and prophesied about 200 years prior. And they took the city without a fight, as Jeremiah describes and prophesies. Cyrus is now sitting on this vast empire that night. He's like, wow, look at this. And then Ezra chapter 1, verses 1 through 3 happens. The word of Jeremiah happens. Babylon is captured so that the people of Israel may go back to their land and God will restore it. And Cyrus makes a proclamation which has two parts. Number one, he says, I'm releasing the Jewish people to return to Jerusalem. And number two, I am commanding that they rebuild the temple destroyed by Nebuchadnezzar. We remember Israel, when they were in Egypt, they were occupied as slaves. When Assyria came into the land, they slaughtered and dispersed the Jewish people. When Babylon came in, they dispersed, enslaved them, and destroyed their cities. Now that Cyrus came to power, he releases them to go home, rebuild, and even pays for most of it. And Israel remains a vassal state of Persia for the next 150 or so years. The Greek historian Neophon lived 100 years after these events of Cyrus and writes extensively about the foreign policy of Cyrus, that he released all of the peoples that the Assyrians and Babylonians had displaced to go back to their homelands and rebuild their temples. On the Cyrus cylinder that was found in the 1800s AD, the same decree which we find and we see in 2 Chronicles chapter 36 and Ezra chapter 1 is on this cylinder. Josephus tells us that when Cyrus had this victory over Babylon, the Jews took Cyrus the book of Isaiah, showed Cyrus Isaiah chapter 45, and this prophecy was a major stirring in Cyrus to change his foreign policy and to enact change upon all of the peoples of his new empire, because he saw his name written there and what he would do, that it was speaking of him and what he would do. Daniel was serving in the court of the king in Babylon at this time, and Daniel went on to be an advisor for foreign policy to the general that was given control over the province of Babylon, now under Persian control. Later, Egypt, Libya, and Nubia will be conquered by Cyrus's son, Cambyses II. This empire reached its peak in 475 BC and ruled 44% of the world's population at the time. During Cambyses II's long campaign to take Egypt, Libya, and Nubia, this is North Sudan, a Zoroastrian priest seized the throne. Darius the Great then overthrew this priest. Darius's son, Xerxes I, ruled after him and went as far as southern Greece and the whole Black Sea region, conquering. But what happens when you go kicking goads? They tend to kick back, and your initial kicking proves to be your very demise. The Babylonians revolt in 521 BC and are later crushed by Darius I. Egypt had even attempted to rebuild and reestablish an alliance with Lydia and Babylon to conquer the Persian expansion. During this time, we also see the rise of Greek influence. We see the Greco-Persian wars happening at this time, and then the eventual conquest of the Persian Empire by Alexander the Great here after 521 BC. We also see a rise of major philosophical and religious traditions. We see Zoroastrianism spread throughout the world. This time in India, we see Buddhism coming about in 528 BC. In China, we see Confucianism coming about between 551 and 479 BC. And we see Taoism, or Taoism as well, coming to its founding as well there in China. In Greece, we see the foundations of Western philosophy with mathematics and the nature of reality, where they're moving away from mythological explanations, so mythology. The next thing that we also see is we see during this time happening in the 500 BCs or the 6th century BC, we see political and institutional innovations coming about. In Greece, there in Athens, we see Cleisthenes established a democratic system of governance in 508 BC, creating the Assembly of the Council of 500, which became the basis for the city's golden age there in Athens. In Italy, the Roman Republic was founded in 509 BC. The third thing that we see in this time, in the 6th century BC, there in the 500s BC, we see the economic and cultural developments happening. In Anatolia, so this would be in modern-day Turkey, the kingdom of Lydia invented coinage around 630 BC, with King Croesus from 560 to 546 BC standardizing gold and silver coins as a form of payment. We see trade coming about. The Phoenician merchants dominated the maritime trade networks at this time, while Greek city-states expanded their influence through colonization, establishing colonies in Sicily, southern Italy, and the Black Sea region. The major geopolitical events following the fall of Assyria and Babylon were dominated by the rapid expansion of the Achaemenid Persian Empire and the resulting conflicts with the Greek world. What we see happening in the Persians and in their empire with the Persian Empire. We see the conquest of Lydia from 547 to 546 BC after overthrowing the Median Empire. Cyrus the Great defeated King Croesus of Lydia, incorporating Western Anatolia, modern-day Western Turkey, into the Persian Empire and bringing the Ionian Greek cities under Persian rule. We see the fall of Babylon again in 539 BC. Cyrus conquered the Neo-Babylonian Empire without a major battle, as recorded on the Cyrus Cylinder. He presented himself as a liberator, Cyrus did, restoring temples and allowing exiled peoples like the Jews to return home. We see also the conquest of Egypt in 525 BC. Cambyses II, son of Cyrus, invaded and defeated Pharaoh Psamtik III at the Battle of Pelusium, adding Egypt into the empire. We also see the consolidation that happened under Darius I between 522 and 486 BC. After a succession crisis, Darius I suppressed widespread revolts across the empire, as detailed in the Bastion inscription, and establishing a highly organized administrative system of satrapies. Now, this was a big part. Remember that time when those who were in the land, when Israel had returned, when the Jewish people had returned to rebuild, a big note that they noted, oh, these people cause revolts. And so they were pulling on the heartstrings of those to get them to come and to squash their work. We also see the Greco-Persian Wars that happened between 499 and 449 BC. The Persian domination of the Ionian Greeks sparked a major conflict with the independent city-states of mainland Greece. The Ionian Revolt also happened during this time between 499 and 493 BC. This was a major rebellion by Greek cities in Asia Minor, modern-day Turkey at the time, supported by Athens and Eretria. And this was crushed by Persia after the pivotal battle of Miletus in 494 BC. We also see the first Persian invasion in 492 and 490 BC in retaliation for Greek support of the revolt. Darius I launched an invasion culminating in the Battle of Marathon, which happened in 490 BC, where the Athenians achieved a decisive victory. Second, we see the Persian invasion in 480 to 479 BC. This we see from Darius' successor, Xerxes I, who led a massive invasion. Key events included the heroic but failed defense at the Battle of Thermopylae, the burning of Athens, and the pivotal naval battle of Salamis in 480 BC. The following year, the Persian army was destroyed at the Battle of Plataea in 479 BC. We then see the Greek counteroffensive. After 479 BC, the Greek city-states, led by Athens in the Delian League, went on the offensive, winning victories at Mycale and Eurymedon, and ultimately securing Greek independence from Persian control. Between the fall of Assyria to Babylon in 612 BC and the fall of Babylon to Persia in 539 BC, there are major geopolitical events outside of the Babylonian Empire that were happening. These included the rise of the Achaemenid Persian Empire. This happened with Cyrus's revolt and conquest of Media in 550 BC. Cyrus the Great, king of the Persian state of Anshan, revolted against and defeated his overlord Astyages of Media, capturing the Median capital of Ecbatana. This event united the Persians and the Medes under Persian leadership, creating a powerful new empire on Babylon's eastern flank. The Battle of the Eclipse, also in 585 BC. This was a war between Lydia and Media that was happening. This was famously halted by a solar eclipse on May 28, 585 BC. This event, recorded by Herodotus, led to a peace treaty mediated by the Babylonians, establishing the Halys River as the border and creating a temporary balance of power between the major non-Babylonian empire. We also see during this time, while Israel was in the 70 years of captivity, we see the conquest of Lydia happening. The Battle of Sardis happening in 546 BC. After defeating the Medes, Cyrus turned west and conquered Lydia. According to Herodotus, the Lydian cavalry, their horses, were thrown into disarray by the unfamiliar scent of Persian camels, leading to a decisive Persian victory and the fall of the Lydian capital Sardis. This conquest brought the wealthy kingdom of Lydia and its Greek subject, cities of the Aegean coastal region under Persian control. Also, we see the rise of the Kingdom of Egypt, a new dynasty coming, the founding of the 26th Site dynasty there in 664 BC, although slightly before the 612 BC start date. The rise of Ptolemy I and the 26th dynasty marked a period of Egyptian resurgence. After the withdrawal of the Assyrian forces, Ptolemy I reunited Egypt and reasserted Egyptian power in the Levant, in the Middle East, becoming a significant player in the region's geopolitics. Egypt formed an alliance then with Lydia and Babylon in a failed attempt to contain the rising Persian threat under Cyrus. Now, these are all of the things, honestly, not even all of the things, these are very big things that we see happening in the backdrop leading up to the exile of Judah in Babylon, during the time of Judah's exile in Babylon, and then the time after. So this would also include events that happened and that the background non-biblical sources that happened that we know from history during the time of Ezra, Nehemiah, and Esther, and then also following after that. Now, when we get to Jeremiah, there are going to be certain things that Jeremiah does prophesy about that do happen even following after the close of our Old Testament canon, that 400 years of white space that happens before Matthew happens, before Jesus comes on the scene, and before the ministry of John the Baptist and the ministry of the Messiah, specifically talking about even Alexander the Great. Now, with that will be in our next in-between series. So the time, that 400 year of white space, quiet time from the Lord, where the Lord was not giving direct revelation, we will look at some of those things that were prophesied, that are biblical sources about this time, but also we will look at some non-biblical sources that talk about what was happening in this time, leading up to Matthew chapter 1. Some closing verses now. Numbers chapter 6, verses 24 through 26. The Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face to shine upon you and be gracious to you. The Lord lift up his countenance upon